Hello and welcome to Mobile Youth TV. My name is Brown. This week we're going to look at a hot growth market. We're going to look at young people in South Africa. What is driving youth in South Africa, particularly in the context of owning and using mobile phones? I'm really fortunate today to be joined by my friend and colleague Marc Kornberger from Student Village in South Africa. How are you doing, Marc?
Very well, and you, Graham. It's great to be here.
Fantastic. Obviously, you've done a lot of work with large financial institutions as well as mobile companies, and these tend to be organisations which have, a few degrees of separation between them and the market. That's the nature of big organisations, right? I guess the benefit of working with organisations like yourself and Student Village is that you really reduce the distance between them and the market opinion. You give them direct access, and they get to see stuff on the ground, ground up, how they view the world. From your experience in the last year, what sort of things are you seeing with students in South Africa? What sort of interesting developments have you reported back, or the stuff that you find exciting about how young people are interacting with brands or technology?
We've seen two major trends in the last year. Firstly, we're finding that students are going online, mainly using their mobile phones. And in fact, when we did the research on the ground, we found that 78% of students go online by their mobile phones, and that was followed by about 74% who access it from campus, typically the computer labs. And what makes it a really remarkable statistic is that internationally the figure sits at around 17% for all internet users, which is saying that all internet users around the world, the average is 17% are accessing the internet via their cell phones.
So, comparatively, what you're saying is that South Africa, even though it's classed as a developing market, is way ahead of the curve.
Yeah, it appears so. And when we looked at that and we thought, well, why is there such a big, difference in usage? We could only, guess that it was because South Africa has some of the cheapest data costs in the world through its 3G network. And it really just shows you that South African students are using their cell phone to access the internet almost 5 times that of the world average.
Wow. Yeah, some great stats. Okay, we'll come back to that trend in a minute. What was the other trend that you said you were going to mention?
The second trend we find is that there's a shift in the handsets that students are adopting, and that they're now choosing to use smartphones over just regular cell phones. The big brands that are out there include the likes of Nokia, Sony Ericsson, and predominantly BlackBerry who stake their claim on campuses around the country when it comes to the smartphone uptake.
And really, what's driving that? Is it the fact that using smartphones they can get cheap messaging, or what do you see as the main drivers there?
Well, we asked students why they chose their cell phone or their smartphone over other phones, and what came back again and again was that they were saying, number one, my friends have them, and number two, I use a service like BBM to talk to my friends.
I think, what's really interesting about that influence, how young people are influencing other young people to buy a certain handset. I'm curious to know the nature of that process. It's just a case of there are people, within the friends have a certain handset so they switch, or maybe it's more pronounced where you have super influencers who seem to influence lots of people. What do you see, on the ground level, how the mechanics of that work? Do you have any info you'd like to share?
It really started with your super influencers on campus, and they were really a handful of people. If you were to say, brands have changed every year. We've seen, I could list you a top brand in each year from 2007 in the minds of students who would say is the one that they've chosen. But in particular this year with some new brands entering the market, we've seen that there would be some super influencers, and we call them brand ambassadors in some ways, and also they're people that aren't brand ambassadors who just love the brand and want to get it out there. And very quickly they were able to reach a tipping point where enough of their friends were using it that if you weren't using it with them, you were actually excluded from the group.
Right, the social pressure, it didn't become necessarily about to have this to look cool. You had this to really stay connected with your friends, right?
We call it pester power, because if your friends are pestering you and saying, why don't you have this? It's quite a strong thing.
Okay. Marc, when we think about brand ambassadors, super influencers, the image that people tend to think about is either, The kind of people that hang outside Apple stores and camp out for 2 nights, or, the kind of geeks that turn up to, these kind of like Star Trek conventions. That's the kind of the negative associations that marketing has about fans and ambassadors, those kind of people. They tend to think they're extreme. They tend to exist at the fringe of peer groups. What's the reality? Is that how it is?
I don't think so at all. I think that the people who are the fans, they just love the brand, and it's as simple as that. And what it means is that if the brand is organizing an activity, they'll be part of that activity. If there's a new product launch or things are happening, they're the first to see it. They're not freaks and they're not geeks and they're not crazy. They just have a love for the brand.
They sort of hands up identify themselves and say, hey, look, I love Nokia, I love Vodacom, or is it sort of a bit more complex than that? My
experience is it's a bit more complex than that, and I think some brands are easier to find the people or the fans that are out there, and some are harder. If you're a startup brand, you're going to obviously have less fans out there, and it's going to be harder to find. But if you're more established and have already gained that popularity, it'll be a lot easier.
Marc, when you go out there onto campus and you work with young people, brand ambassador programs, wherever it might be, what really excites you about that? I mean, you've been doing this for 10 years now, right? So what keeps you going?
I think it's the fact that every brand is different and that you can't apply the same formula. There's no cut and paste solution here, and a lot of our clients say, we want a brand ambassador solution. Can we have it? Can we have it tomorrow? And the answer is it cannot be done. We really need to understand what the brand is about, what the underlying values are, and how, we're going to use this tool, which we call a brand ambassador, for the client. And we've never run a brand ambassador campaign that's been identical for any brand in the last 10 years. So that makes it quite exciting.
How do they differ? Do they differ in terms of the kind of messages or the format?
I think they differ in the target that they set out to accomplish. So some brands, for example, alcohol brands, will have a very different requirement, which may be to drive volume, drive sales, or drive brand in a certain way through, let's say, for example, parties. Whereas a banking brand will have a very different outcome. That's to possibly get people to take up different accounts. It's to target societies on campus and not the parties. So it's really to look at how the infiltration is going to happen, where these guys are going to activate. Even the type of brand ambassador is so important, and you could think that an alcohol brand ambassador and a banking brand ambassador are going to be two quite different people.
Okay, so one of the assumptions people usually have is that a fan is a fan, right? But what you're saying is that fans are specific to the brands.
Yeah, definitely so. I mean, it's every brand's got a unique fingerprint.
Take the brand ambassador idea as a marketing strategy. I can see companies that have products being more likely to get the brand ambassador idea because it's easy for them to see that you can take a product onto campus, you can get people using it, talking about it. Let's say you're a service, you're a mobile operator, for example, and this is new stuff for you. Could that work for them? If so, how could it work?
My answer would be it could work for any brand. We've really seen that going from the most exciting brands to the most conservative brands. And if you look at a mobile brand in particular, I think there's a lot of avenues to create excitement.
For people listening, they may be thinking, I really get this. I want to make this happen in my organization. I want to start a brand ambassador program. We want to build some dialogue on campus, but I'm facing the resistance internally. What do I do? How do I deal with that? I
think the first thing is to be brave and to really make a stand. And what we found is that the brand managers and the marketing managers who know upfront that they want to pursue this know that they're not going to pursue it as a project. It was that they had a firm understanding that peer-to-peer marketing was the way to go, and that they were going to be brave and not try the usual stuff that's out there. They weren't going to just go onto TV. And by knowing that the peers were the place to focus on, they knew that was where they had to spend their money and a lot of their time. And when you're dealing with peer-to-peer networking, you've got to know that you're developing relationships one-on-one. And it's not about mass appeal here, it's about intimate appeal. The first brand ambassador campaign we did was for Axe. And nothing like this had ever happened on campus. And the brand ambassadors themselves became heroes on campus. They even got cars. And it was something that people have remembered for years and years and years. And we'll often meet a brand manager who went to that campus and they said, I remember these guys were the hottest guys on campus. Everyone wanted to be their friends. It was for this brand. They had the cars and it worked. And every event that they were part of or where they were on campus, students were engaged. And if they were engaged and that worked, I want to do something similar. You know, a lot of product managers and brand managers get falsely lulled into the fact that people buy products based solely on convenience. The same thing holds true with mobile brands. You can see a lot of mobile phones are actually becoming smartphones now with similar convenient features. So the big question is like, what will keep them standing out amongst the pack and retaining their customers? What we found is that some brands have channeled convenience into something a lot more powerful. And if you think about, you know, BlackBerry Messenger or BBM, for example, you can see in South Africa that BlackBerry are winning the land grab on the smartphone market, especially with young people. And if your friends are using BBM to communicate, where to meet during a recess or like where the latest party is tonight, then it's really tough not to be part of something like that. But BBM is tapping into something very strong, and it's an underlying need of students, which is to belong.
It's an emotional need rather than a functional need.
Because if you go onto campus and you say to students, what do you want out of a mobile phone? They're going to give you a lot of the answers that you could already guess. They're going to say, I want email, or I want a bigger keyboard or a bigger screen. But what they're really saying is something very different, and you've got to dig deep and you've got to ask the right questions to know that. And, you know, when they say, I want it for BBM, what they're actually saying is, I want it so I can belong with the rest of my group. And if you say to them, I'm going to take your cell phone away and you can't BBM, you might as well say to that student, I'm taking away your oxygen supply.
Yeah, very true. It's difficult though, isn't it, to sort of get that insight in traditional methods, because I think the old saw applies is that people buy on emotion and justify with logic.